On President Trump's orders, U.S. military seizes Nicolas Maduro, Venezuela's dictator, and returns him to the United States to stand trial for drug crimes. The people of Iran launch an uprising against the corrupt and oppressive clerical regime. And finally, the U.S. is making plans to build its first battleship since 1943. What are the implications for the return of big gun armored warships? You're listening to Mensch-Kight Geopolitics. Mensch-Kight Geopolitics is your home for conservative commentary on international affairs with an eye toward Israel and the Middle East. I'm your host, Isaac Kight, your lovable lawnsman, your gregarious Vulcan, your mad genius, your shadow president, and your prophet of things to come. Welcome back, my friends. My God, what a year. It's 11 days into the new year, and wow, as usual with the Trump administration in office, just everything at once, everywhere, all the things. I had a bunch of you guys messaging me asking for my opinion on these things. I should have got this episode out sooner. It's one of these things that every time something interesting happens out there, something happens to me. So I had a bad case of food poisoning, and I've been battling sepsis for a week. I'm finally well enough to get back out here, but oh my God, let me tell you, whew, it's been exciting. So let's get back at it. Obviously, the book continues to progress. I'm editing fleshing out some of the earlier stuff I wrote. I hadn't planned to be as detailed as I am now. So little bit by little bit, it's getting better. But also, I had little blurbs here and there making references to different historical things. And it's like now I've fleshed a lot of that out elsewhere. So there's not as much need to cover, those kinds of things. But still, it's been a lot of fun. Before I dive into the really fun stuff, a couple of U.S. things that I have to note. And, let me just get a couple of the big ones out of the way. I mean, we had a lady try to run over an ICE agent, and he fired. If the officer thinks his life is in danger and he's being attacked with a deadly weapon, as a vehicle is, that's up to him to protect himself. But these crazy people, these nutters and terrorists who are attacking, they killed Charlie Kirk, and then they want to, impede our ability to get rid of illegals. Obviously they want them to vote, right? 500,000 illegals caught on the California voter rolls, and that's just the ones that have been found. So, wow. Anyway, okay, so the Somali daycare thing, just fraud everywhere. This isn't a surprise. We all knew there was fraud. The blatant nature of it, that it's so just out there, just overt. Nobody's even trying to hide it. It's just there. If you go out and look at the building, you can see that there's no daycare there. I mean, who was checking on whose job was it to ensure that money was actually going to help kids? Because obviously it didn't get there. So on the one hand, we need to go after those who committed the fraud and, that kind of thing. On the other hand, we have to acknowledge that, it's our people here. It's state legislators, it's governors like Waltz. It's these people who allowed this to happen. They took away all of the controlling mechanisms, all of the oversight, all of the checks that are supposed to go into that system to ensure that people cannot commit fraud. And they made sure that anyone could commit whatever bloody fraud they please. With that said, obviously, my friends, I'm in the wrong business. I'm getting up too early and driving and working to maintain safety of the road and get stuff moved and all this responsibility on me. I'm quitting all that. I'm quitting all this podcasting or whatever. I'm opening a Somali daycare. Talk about, easy money. I mean, aside from the fact that I could not live with myself knowing that I'm not earning my keep, I just, it's just unbelievable. But I mean, millions and millions of dollars just vanishing into thin air. And then we found a defense rocket company that's like an old abandoned building out somewhere. I mean, anyway, this stuff is being rooted out. Elon's out there throwing a number around like 600 billion. We know there's a lot of fraud and waste. It's time we got to the bottom of it. It's time we started going after every penny. We need to search the federal budget. Every single penny needs to be accounted for, and we need to make sure that the stuff is going where it's supposed to go. So I just wanted to get that stuff out of the way. Now, I did want to note, a couple months back, a couple people were messaging and a little bit gloomy, oh, the Dems are up in the polls and look at they won in Virginia and New Jersey. And it's like, yeah, blue states are still blue, but red states are still red. So no worries there. But there's all this stuff going on. And I kept saying on the show, I kept reminding you guys, look, there's a bunch of stuff that's going to hit in 2026. People start getting their tax refunds. We're going to, people are going to start seeing the benefits of the big, beautiful bill. There's all this stuff happening. There's a lot that can happen in a year. Well, we're a couple months into that year between the events of New Jersey, Virginia, and all that, and the midterm election. And just look, I mean, all this fraud. I mean, now these are campaign ads, right? I mean, Somali fraud and this kind of thing. You have Secretary of State, Secretary of the Treasury, Scott Bessent, working to shut down foreign wire transfers. If you're on public assistance now, we're going to have to keep you from doing foreign wire transfers, which makes some sense. I mean, as he said, look, if you're on public assistance and you have money to send overseas, then either you're receiving too much assistance, you're receiving assistance that you don't need, or you shouldn't be on public assistance because clearly you have money to send overseas. We should not be financing terrorism with our tax dollars. Just, oh my God. Whew. Okay. Speaking of Scott Bessent, all right. So 2025 was a very interesting year economically. We started off the first quarter with a 0.5 point contraction in the economy. So the real GDP dropped in the first quarter by an annualized rate of 0.5 point. Now, coming off the Biden years, so if Harris had been elected, there'd have been a recession. And of course, the media would have told us, "Oh no, everything's fine. You're making it up. Don't worry about it." Sure, but we would all know we were in a recession, and that would have gone several quarters. What is a recession? A recession is 2 or more quarters of negative growth. That means like that 0.5 point there. Okay, but Trump got into office. And immediately we started turning this economy around, right? So by second quarter, right, when we get the second quarter numbers, that's April, May, June, right? We were at an annualized growth rate of 3.8%. Huge swing. And this is all the people, oh God, the tariffs are gonna destroy the economy. And all the whining and the wailing and gnashing of teeth and the wearing of sackcloth because, oh my God, Trump was gonna destroy everything. Okay. We saw the quarter 3 numbers come out recently, and those were 4.3%. So we tacked on another 0.5 point on the second quarter numbers. All right. Well, we got quarter 4 projection now. Now, remember that in quarter 4, this is October, November, December, right? We had the government shut down with all this nonsense going on, and unfortunately, the government is still a big chunk of the economy. The number that's being projected for quarter 4 is 5.4% growth. Now, let's just take that in for a second. So when Trump took office in quarter 1, we were headed into a recession, right? The definition was 2 quarters. We only had the 1 quarter of negative growth. Okay, we were headed into one. If we had not made any economic reforms, if we'd continued with the status quo, we would have had a recession by the end of the second quarter, right? We would have had the second quarter of negative growth, and we would know we were in a recession. All right. So we were headed into a recession. And now we're looking at an annualized growth rate of 5.4% in quarter 4. My friends, that's, from negative 0.5 point to 5.4% is almost a 6-point swing in the right direction. And with that, I mean, obviously, as the numbers are calculated and crunched, we'll get a more accurate number. So that number will change, could be 5.2%. Might be below the expectation. Could be 5.6%, could be above the expectation, but it's going to be somewhere in that ballpark. They don't usually, come in vastly different from what's predicted. So that means that Trump will have gone from like -5 to over 5% growth in 1 year in office, which is just incredible. I mean, that's an economic miracle. In a developed economy, I mean, this isn't, North Korea, where if you just left it up on the economy, let people produce something and earn a little bit of a profit for it, you'd have this immediate, uptick in productivity because people would want the prosperity, right? We're talking about, you know, the United States of America. This is a developed economy. Anyway, so that's huge. By quarter 1 of 2026, we could actually be above 6% growth. Trump's been talking about 5, 6%. No, more anymore. Yeah, it's not, huh? Tell me more. If we're at 5.4% in quarter 1, 2026 could be over 6%. I mean, if the trend continues of about growing by more than half a point by quarter 2, I mean, even if we don't get over 6% in Q1 2026, we could be over 6% in quarter 2. The point is the economy is going gangbusters. Unemployment continues to fall. It's like 4.4%. I mean, again, very close to full employment, right? I mean, at this point, we might as well just call it what it is. We're 4/10 of a point from the target the target unemployment rate, from full employment. And the jobs that people are getting when they are able to find work are good private sector, gainful employment, productive employment, not, government jobs where they're a drain on the economy. And some cases that's not true. Obviously, our first responders, our law enforcement, our medical, our national security apparatus, those are things that provide value that can't be monetized. I mean, what is the value of national security? It's hard to grow an economy when you're being bombed, right? Law enforcement, it's difficult to run a business when you're being robbed constantly, or your employees can't come to work safely. So, those guys provide a value. Fire starts and you have someone to come put it out, right? And then you can effect repairs and get your business going again. So those people, somebody gets hurt, paramedics. I mean, those people provide a service that is valuable. But the number crunchers who work at the clerk's office, if there are 3 or 4 more of them than there need to be, or in some cases, you have whole buildings full of bureaucracies that you're like, what does this do? It just produces a bunch of reports that go to another bureaucracy, and it's like, let's get rid of this. Anyway, just incredible numbers. And I just had to share that. I mean, just Scott Bessent really is the greatest Secretary of the Treasury since Alexander Hamilton. I mean, there is just no doubt at this point the economic miracles that he has performed there. And one last, quick note there. So remember the swap loan that we did with Javier Milei in Argentina? Everybody's, we're lending them billions and billions of dollars. So they took out something like 2.5 billion to cover some loans and did some adjustments here and there. And ultimately, they have now paid us back. So the swap loan is done. The United States has been repaid. And in this process, we don't have the precise number quite yet, but that number will be published. The United States taxpayers, you and I, our government, has earned tens of millions of dollars in profit from this. So we helped out a fellow traveler, a conservative candidate in South America. We did great things for their economy. We did some cool stuff for us, and we profited in the process. It's just brilliant. Can it get any better than that, my friends? So great economic news, a lot of good stuff going on. And, the usual politics will be politics. Poll numbers will be poll numbers. People will be up and negative and down. Things will get positive and negative. The ICE thing, this is all going to blow over. I mean, people want the law enforced. People want illegals deported. People want their communities to be safe. The Dems overestimate their ability to push for this kind of nonsense. So anyway, so we're going to be there. All right. Nicolas Maduro. This is just brilliant. So, we had in the Bush administration the forever wars, right? We got into Afghanistan, and I remember back then, after 9/11, I mean, there was a distinct possibility we were going to have a terrorist attack every year, or every couple of years, or several of them in a year. From then going forward, I mean, these guys in Al Qaeda weren't going to give up. They had big plans, right? They'd sent several people trying to get in for the 2000 New Year's. We managed to catch some of those people. They did 9/11. They had plans for attacks on Los Angeles in 2002, so on and so forth. But we had to go get these guys out of there and stop this nonsense. But we had no exit strategy. Once we got into Afghanistan, got the Taliban out. Okay, now what? Now we're occupying this country, and we have no way to get out of there. Donald Trump, in his first term, almost had a deal to get the Taliban to accept the legitimate government there, the elected government, and that the two would work together, and then the U.S. forces could leave. But they banked on the thought that if somehow Trump didn't win the election, that they'd have a better shot under a Democrat president, and they were right. Joe Biden basically, ignored Afghanistan, and so they were able to take the whole place over. And once they'd effected their little revolution there, the Russians took a look at Ukraine like, well, if America's going to, just give up on Afghanistan, then obviously we can, who cares about Ukraine? Then we'll go take it, right? So this just snowball effect. We just had all of these follow-on effects from the weakness of the Biden administration. And it is just good to have Donald Trump back and just have the security. I mean, there are policies I disagree with here and there, but, okay. So let's look at how he did this. He's had ships off the coast for some time, and we know that there are troops there, that there are special forces, that there are some Marines, that we have some ground forces, but not enough to occupy anything, right? You need several infantry divisions if you're going to go into a place as big as Venezuela. So we knew that he didn't plan to occupy Venezuela. So my thought was, he's going to do something. When the time is right, he's going to strike and do something. And meanwhile, we're taking out the narco boats and we're, capturing the oil tankers. That scares the hell out of the Russians. A lot of that oil was headed for China. But, it's like if we start going after the shadow fleet, Vladimir Putin's going to start sweating really, really bad. I mean, bullets of sweat start falling from his brow. That is the way to end the war in Ukraine very quickly, is to go after Russia's shadow fleet. And so we knew something was going to happen. But look at the way he did it. Go in with helicopters, disable the air defenses along the way, damage a military base, go into the presidential palace, grab Maduro, and get out. Just like that. The Air Force One scenario, right? If you've seen Air Force One, Harrison Ford, great movie. Gary Oldman is so good. I mean, he's terrifying as a villain. But there's some great acting in that movie. It's one of those great 90s action flicks that if we could just have action flicks like that again, oh man, get off my plane. That's just one of those great things. But, just like that, they went in, they grabbed Maduro, they got out. Now, there are all these people, that's not legal. They were just effecting a warrant for the guy's arrest. He's wanted for narco charges, for drug charges here in the United States. And now he will appear in court in the United States, he and his wife, for the charges that they have been indicted for. And like any, in the American court system, he'll have, a lawyer, the ability to hire an attorney for his defense, and we'll bring the witnesses and the evidence, and have a chance to refute it. It's pretty rock solid case. So if I were he, I'd start negotiating some kind of a deal, and just go ahead and plead guilty. There's no point in trying to argue that you're not guilty. In any case, that is beautiful. Now, the follow-on. This is where things get interesting. And I started thinking about it as soon as it happened. I was like, so what do you do here? So do you let Delcy Rodriguez, the vice president, take over? This is Marxist, your usual whatever. What she is not is, Maduro used to be a general. Like, she's not a tough guy. She's a Marxist nutter. Her dad was one of the leading terrorist commies in Central America, South Central America there for a while. So, not a surprise. She's cut from that cloth, and her brother's the head of the National Assembly, and so, one of these politically embedded families. Do you let her take charge? Do you try to get people like the guy who was elected in the last election? We're fairly confident that Edmundo Gonzalez was able to defeat Maduro, and that the election was rigged, and ergo Maduro's being not legitimate. And even the Biden administration had a $25 million reward out for the capture of Maduro. So anyway, there's this stuff. Anyway, okay, so this guy is um, Gonzalez, you could say, well, why don't you make him president? Because of course, he was the runner up. But then, there's this regime in power that it's Maduro's old regime and all of its mechanisms. And then you just expect them to follow this other guy that was elected. And, Machado, who's hiding out in Norway, and she's been able to come out of hiding, she didn't run for president because she's not that popular. She's an opposition figure, and she should have a right to be in opposition, to speak her mind and be free in Venezuela without persecution. But so Trump says, well, we'll let Delcy Rodriguez take power. We'll let the regime titularly stay in power, but he said, we're running the place, right? We're giving the orders. Now, if you're Delcy Rodriguez, like, your predecessor is sitting in a federal prison in New York. You know what I mean? Like, anytime we want, the United States can swoop down and whisk you away to the same environs, if you know what I mean. So it would behoove you to behave yourself, right? Now we can begin this process of transitioning. Two things need to happen. One, the country needs to become less oppressive, and two, they need to get the economy going. All right. So Trump told them, release political prisoners. And we have seen the release of political prisoners. Eduardo Gonzalez is free, the opposition candidate who was arrested for, the crime of maybe having won the election and being an opposition figure, right? He's been released. There are all these wonderful videos of family members reuniting with their children and friends, meeting other friends, because people were arrested and that kind of thing. Now, the regime in the past has propped itself up with the help of Russia and Iran and China. And so there are Cuban soldiers there and what have you. Those people need to get out of there. They're going to be departing soon. If you're one of these foreign people in a country like this that's in the middle of a revolution, you don't want to be there, because when the when the feces hit when the defecation hits the rotary device, people like that, foreigners, are going to be lined up and shot. Right? Everyone can agree that they hate the foreigners, right? So you want to be gone. So this is really bad for Cuba, first of all. Okay, so we get those people out. So slowly but surely, the foreign oppressive mechanisms that help to reinforce the regime are going to have to leave. Okay, political prisoners are already free, so that's a step in the right direction. Now, increasingly, the people of Venezuela can speak their minds. Right? That's a step in the right direction. Talking about oil infrastructure, there's already been a meeting. Talk about the companies going back into Venezuela, whose assets were seized when the country nationalized its oil supplies. And, their oil output has vastly decreased because, of course, the government doesn't know how to maintain or develop, oil infrastructure. So you have this huge oil-rich country, and they can't even get their oil out in large part. So these companies are going to have to go in and invest a whole bunch of money. Well, they're already owed a whole bunch of money because a bunch of stuff was stolen from them, which, as President Trump has said, it's more than reasonable that they be able to recover that money from Venezuela in the process of pumping the oil out. So this is a big investment. Exxon has already said they're not quite sure they want to go in because they don't know that they trust the situation. Trump's threatening to exclude them. So I don't know if I want to be... I don't want to cross the president on that. But, if we go back in there and start getting the oil flowing again, out from under sanctions, and that money goes to help the people of Venezuela and develop their economy, what money does go back to them, because, of course, the oil companies will need their investment recouped, and they'll need to recover their losses from when the oil was nationalized. But there's plenty of oil. All right. Now, with that, people have noted, of course, President Trump, then controlling both the oil of the market of the United States and that of Venezuela, controls the price of oil. And he can ensure now that the price of oil will not go above $50 a barrel, which is very bad for Vladimir Putin, who needs to be able to sell oil at any price but the higher the better. And so that's really bad news for them. Okay, so slowly but surely, Venezuela is becoming less oppressive, and the mechanisms that have been used to repress the people will be loosened, and the economic development will begin, and there can be a transition to what we might eventually call a free and fair election, right? And then the people of Venezuela can make a choice for themselves. Now, chances are they're not going to want to elect Delcy Rodriguez or one of these Marxist nutterballs who's been oppressing them for years. But whoever it is that's on the ballot then will be on the ballot, and they'll have that election, and there will be a choice. So this is kind of the slow staged process. So this doesn't involve any U.S. occupation of the country, and that's huge. Now, since we've been hitting their narco trafficking and all that, Venezuela has already been unable to continue funding left-wing movements in the Americas, and that's been helping with the move in Bolivia and Chile and all these countries moving to the right. Petra in Colombia, Trump's already told him to put a sock in it, and Lula da Silva in Brazil. Soon, hopefully, both of them will be gone. Elections are coming up, and center-right candidates will replace them. And then those countries can prosper as well. So we're getting South America cleaned up pretty quickly here. Cuba is still a huge issue, but they're on notice. I mean, this is not a good thing for Cuba, right? If we can just go in and snatch dictators out of their beds in Venezuela, we can do that anywhere. With Sheinbaum and Mexico, there's already been talk of the U.S. engaging in direct strikes on the cartels. If Obrador's government, she's basically Obrador's protege, if that government is just going to let the cartels run half of Mexico, then we have no choice in order to prevent narco trafficking in the U.S. than to act against that. So the Americas et al. Are on notice, right? And things are shifting away from the left back to prosperity and to the right. And that's huge. The way in which this has been done, I mean, are there better ways? I don't know. But one thing I do know is a U.S. occupation of Venezuela wouldn't be fun for anyone. Because then, you have guerrillas and they're going to attack us and kill our young people and try to demoralize us that way, like we saw in Afghanistan and Iraq. We don't need to create those circumstances. There can be a transition. So this is huge. This is really an improvement, and we'll see what happens from here. Trump does seem to have some say in the situation. So, and again, this regime, like if they don't want to be bombed, if they don't want to have their leaders, whisked away for trial in the U.S., they better behave themselves and mind their P's and Q's. Like I said, I wouldn't cross President Trump. That might not be a very good idea. All right, when I get back from the break, I will talk about Iran, and then at the very end, a little bit about naval procurement, because the battleships are back, and that's going to be a fun topic there. You're listening to Mensch-Kight Geopolitics with Isaac Kite. Or as the internet trolls say, mouthpiece of the Zionist conspiracy, spokesman for the elders of Zion, highly paid propagandist of the Mossad. Yeah, no. Now you're messing with the son of a mensch. Protests have erupted in Iran. This is going to be interesting to see how this turns out. There have been protests before in Iran. There's been disturbances, uprisings, and trouble there before, and it has come generally to nothing. Now, these tended to have a cause or something that instigated it. For example, the death of Mahsa Amini recently led to a lot of people revolting over women's rights. And, the administration was oppressive and then made some compromise where they weren't going to enforce those religious rules for a while. And then, after things calmed down, they got the religious police back out and started cracking heads again. So we have this pattern, right? So why is this uprising different from all the others? That's been the question. A couple of things are different. First of all, in outlying regions, whole towns have been able to throw out the government. right? And that means they've captured military bases and police stations, small scale stuff, small arms, not big stuff, not tanks, not heavy equipment or anything like that. So this is one of the reasons why the Russians are flying in heavy equipment, flying in heavy weapons and this kind of stuff to help the regime. So that's different. Usually there are riots and that kind of thing, and maybe confrontations with the police, but that's as far as it goes. So that's gone a little farther. In the core of Iran, right, the beating heart of Iran has two chambers, as I like to say, and those are Tehran and Isfahan. That's the center of the country, where the largest Persian majority lives. It's where things are happening in Iran. And there have been a lot of uprisings there. Why? A couple of things going on in addition to the usual, corruption and repression and oppression of the government. There's no water. This is a big problem. There's actually talk of evacuating significant portion of the population of Tehran because there's not enough water. When you spend billions and billions of dollars, on Hezbollah and Hamas and the Houthis, developing proxies and going out and attacking other countries, this kind of thing, instead of developing your water infrastructure, funny thing happens. There's no water. It's a desert. That if you know about the history of the region, the whole history of the Middle East is the history of water, right? When it's lush and green and people are prosperous and lots of people, everything's happy and empires expand and whatever. As soon as the water starts to dry up, as soon as you have a drought, all of a sudden there's internal conflict, disease, empires fall, new empires move in, and this kind of thing. So the Persian Plateau, that middle of the country, Tehran down, it's very dry. So you would think you would want to spend money building dams and running water infrastructure. I know quite a bit about this stuff because I grew up in California and I love the Sierra Nevada mountains and I lived in the coastal mountains, and it's like there are reservoirs all over California. Why? California is a desert, funny thing. It doesn't look like it to most people, but it is in fact a desert. And you have to store water in the reservoirs and that kind of thing. And so I remember talking with some of the native groups, the people like the Tuolamis who used to live there. They live up in the mountains now in reservations, and they would talk about how in the summer they would go up into the mountains to hunt and forage, but also because there was water. There was water up in the mountains. It was always dry down in the valley, the Central Valley of California. So, they would be down there during the winter when it was wet and foggy and, relatively warm in the valley, warmer in the valley certainly than up in the mountains. And then they would go up in the mountains in the summertime because there was water and food, right? Food and water. A little bit cooler than the heat of the valley and this kind of thing. And so it's like even the natives have stories about it being a desert. So California, they dammed up Hetch Hetchy Canyon up near Yosemite and made a reservoir and ran the water down to San Francisco. All kinds of water resources go into Los Angeles. I'm not even going to go into that. But if you want water in California, if you want to supply millions of people with water, you have to bring it from somewhere else because there's just no water. It's a desert. And certainly not enough is going to fall from the sky. Slowly but surely, Californians are getting smarter and they're starting to desal, right? If you desalinate water, there's plenty of water in the ocean. You just have to get the salt out of it. Okay, recycling water, all this kind of stuff. So water, you have to be smart with water. So we have to go do this stuff. Well, these projects are expensive. It's expensive to build dams and this kind of thing. And the Iranians could have been spending their money on that and bringing water and this kind of thing and developing water efficiency, actually. The Israelis are masters of that. You'd think Israel is also a desert, funny thing, and water is a tricky issue. So the Israelis are really efficient with the use of water and the transport of water, piping. So they have a technology that would go into and examine all the pipes and would figure out where your largest leaks are, so that you could focus your regular maintenance on those areas. And then by clearing out and closing your largest leaks, you're thus preserving the most water in the system. Why go out and replace, pipe where there's a small leak that maybe is costing you 1% of your water, when you've got a leak that's costing you 12% of your water every year over in this in particular place. Well, let's fix that. And then, hey, now we're preserving 12% of our water. We're not losing that water anymore. Just one example of the many, many, many ways in which Israel has innovated. They have a desalinization process that's done by osmosis. You have a whole bunch of basically plastic film, and the holes in the plastic film are big enough for water molecules to pass through, but not sodium. And so by passing water through these various films and membranes, osmosis, you filter out all of the salt to a point where it's pure enough to drink. Anyway, brilliant technology. So Israel could be helpful if the Iranians weren't actively trying, to murder all the citizens of Israel, men, women, and children, Jew, Muslim, and Christian alike. Anyway, there's that. There's 41% inflation. Like the real is completely collapsed. Their currency is completely dead. And this is what happens with mismanagement. And of course, US sanctions. Trump put sanctions back on, and they are tough and they are tight. So it's a bad time to be Iranian. Biden, there were good times under Biden. He let up on the sanctions. And now we know that if he'd put the screws to them, if he'd kept those sanctions on, Iran would have been in tough predicament. Instead, they were able to finance October 7th and all that followed from it. Oh, it's just so frustrating. I was so glad that Senator Ted Cruz called that out from the very beginning, that the Biden administration was basically financing all the terrorism in the Middle East by letting the Iranians sell oil. Anyway, but we've seen now that Trump's put the screws to them on the sanctions. Well, there was also the 12-day war. Israel confronted Iran directly, and so Israeli planes were able to fly from Israel, refuel over northern Iraq, and go bomb Iran, and go back and refuel and go home. And there wasn't a darn thing the Iranians could do about it. Their air defenses were completely impotent. They didn't shoot down so much as a single Israeli aircraft. Israeli drones were flying around Iran. Drones were in Iran, ready to go, and started flying around, buzzing around Iran, doing damage to infrastructure and this kind of thing, and military targets. I mean, so clearly Israel just had its way with Iran, the Iranian government. So it's like you spend these billions of dollars on all this terrorism. We're going to kill the great Satan and their little Satan and all this kind of stuff. And America's more powerful than it's ever been. And Israel can slap Iran around all at once. And there's inflation and there's no water. This is a little bit different situation. One thing, you can be many things as a government in the Middle East, okay? You can be many, many things. One thing you can never be is impotent. And I mean this in both terms because let's just say virility and masculinity are extremely important to Iranian culture, right? Like a man is a man. And if he's not a man, then he's a pushover, right? He's a flower. Okay, so the point is, you can't be a delicati ruling Iran. Let's put it that way. Okay, so if you're getting slapped around by Israel and the United States, right? The U.S. went in and bombed Fordow and the other nuclear sites with, the big GBU-57s, big bunker buster bombs from our B-2 stealth bombers. Iran didn't even know they were there. They couldn't do anything about them. Boom, boom, boom. Okay. So everybody's slapping Iran around, and they can't do anything about that. And there's no water, and they can't do anything about that. And the currency's collapsing, and there's massive and rampant inflation, and they can't do anything about that. So it's one of those things like, so what are you good for? Right? From the Iranian perspective, is like there's the people of Iran are a woman who have a husband, and he can't put food on the table, and he can't provide comfort to his wife, and he can't do anything right. Like the house is crumbling, there's no water, there's no anything. So what good is he? Right? This is the thing that's different. So we've got all these protests. I've been watching this very carefully. Several intelligence agencies have come out, from Mossad to the CIA to several others, that they actually think there's an opportunity here to seek regime change, that they see that this uprising could be more than just the usual protests and this kind of thing over women's rights or whatever issue. This is bigger. This is about the impotence of the government. This is about its corruption and oppression, and people are just fed up. And they know, the other thing is they know there's a better way. If Iran were a free and democratic country and had even a moderate leader, someone that the West could at least tolerate, that we could hold our noses and shake hands with, then we could lift the sanctions, right? They wouldn't be financing terrorism and trying to murder everybody and, have the Houthis, blowing up ships in the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. It's like, we could just, all that could just stop. And the people of Iran could prosper. They have oil. They're highly intelligent, highly capable people. you know, uh, the Iranians are the source of all the myths, European mid-19th century European myths about the Aryan master race. And the reason that is because people went to Iran and they started talking to people like, holy mackerel, these people are smart. And you might say the origins of modern science and intellectualism combined with Greek thought, right? Okay, so the Iranian people could do all of these wonderful things if they didn't have this government that, as it turns out, is impotent, right? It's floppy. It's not able to do anything. It can't perform. It can't do anything right. It can't accomplish anything. Everybody gets to slap it around, right? Can't defend itself. So, there is a possibility. So that's what's different this time. The attitudes, the timing, all that. Meanwhile, the Russians are sending heavy weapons to Iran. So now things get a little bit more curious institutionally. And I don't necessarily want to spend a lot of time going into the intricacies of Iranian society, but let's just say, so, Iran has an army. And like all armies, it's an institution. Like most government, it's corrupt and backwards. And you hear all these things that, it's a conscript army, like 350,000 people in the army on paper, and it's an army. Now, the army is dedicated to the regime and it is radical like the regime, but it's not, I don't want to say it, it's not an ideological paramilitary force like the IRGC. Okay, so I'm back to that. So again, in the Nazi regime, you had the Wehrmacht, which was an army, and the army would go out and fight the enemy. And then you had Himmler and the SS, right? They would form like Waffen-SS units. They would go around rounding up Jews and killing people, and the Einsatzgruppen that are going around shooting people and in mass and this kind of thing. So they were the ideological troops, many of whom were actually not German. Like they'd take Norwegians and people from the Netherlands, Belgium, people who wanted to join up internationally could go and join the SS and commit war crimes and be horrible people. So the IRGC is like that. Maybe 50,000 people on paper in the IRGC, probably smaller than that, but that's the elite force that holds the government there. And they got their religious police and a couple of other institutions, but nothing quite so big. The Iranian Air Force, Iranian Navy, maybe 10,000 each, they're not really a factor here, all right? And honestly, navies are important, but they're rarely a major political force in countries. Like you see that, when the Kriegsmarine went red at the end of the First World War, they supported the communists. They weren't really able to affect any kind of policy. The Freikorps still were able to overcome the communists, and Germany remained non-communist. Right, they were able to defeat the communists in spite of the navy supporting them. Right. However, if what remained of the Wehrmacht, the Reichswehr back then, if what remained of that institution had supported the communists, that would have been different because it's a large land force. Right. Obviously, the army remained loyal to the government and thus opposed the communists. So that's the point, that you have these institutional things. The army has a big say in who governs Iran. And the IRGC they're the hardcore ideological, Fruit Loops, the SS, let's just say, of Iran. And they're the ones who are the real problem. They're the ones who are loyal to the mullahs, to the religious elites. And the total number of them and the degree to which they are willing to fight and die for the cause is what really holds the regime together. It's doubtful that the army, push come to shove, will really back the government. That's not entirely clear. Like they might go out and kind of stand in the back as the IRGC goes and commits horrors, shooting at people. But the people who are shooting at the protesters, different numbers thrown around from 50 to 2,000, probably on the lower number right now, but a number of protesters have been shot, especially in the country's core. That's IRGC stuff going on right there. So they're going to support the government because they have to, right? They're diehards, but also, their power stems from the existence of the clerical government. If the clerical government is overthrown, whatever remains, they're gone. Either they have to leave the country or they're going to get killed because, they've committed all these horrors in Iran. They're not going to get away with that. So now the question is, does the Iranian army back the government? Right? They're the large landslide. So if the Iranian army decided, you know what, we're tired of this government, and they decided to try to push the government out of power, probably the government falls. But, a good number of generals would be sticking their neck out pretty far, and there's a good chance that a number of them would be killed in the process. It's not very profitable if you die. And, so for the army, if they're going to make a move like that, they're going to wait for the right time, right? And that's assuming that any of their leaders would do that in the first place, right? They could also just sit back and wait and see how this goes and not really help either side, and then they'll go with whoever wins, right? Classic tactic in the Middle East. Just sit back and armchair in your armchair and wait to see who wins. So if that's the case, and that's the most likely scenario, I think, I just don't see the army really wanting to get involved. The government may draw them in. But like I said, that would most likely end up being the army kind of standing back and maybe guarding the regime while the IRGC goes and does what it does. Even then, I'm not sure how far the army is going to get involved here. If that's the case, the protesters have a really fair fight, if you will, against the IRGC. All right, there's all that. Now, on top of that, Iran does not exist in a vacuum. There was the 12-day war. There was the bombing of the Iranian nuclear facilities. Donald Trump has already said, if the government goes and starts shooting protesters, we may choose to intervene, right? And when he says we, I mean, the United States has the most powerful air force in the world with bombers that you can't even see. They can go into your country, drop bombs, and leave and at their leisure, right? Just like it's a piece of cake. It's a cakewalk, as they say in the Air Force, right? It's a cakewalk. They can waltz right in and waltz right back out. And you'll never know you'll never be the wiser. So, and the U.S. has planes. We've sent a few extra planes over. There have been exercises. B-52s have been flying around Qatar and the UAE and in the Arabian Gulf and making a show of things. Probably Trump's just warning them. There's all these people, yes, it's going to bomb, Israel's going to bomb. Now, this would be interesting because the Fordo operation wasn't quite a joint operation, right? Like Israeli forces just kind of had to stand down knowing that U.S. forces were going in. So there was coordination, but it wasn't really a hand-in-hand operation. The United States and Israel really haven't ever done a joint operation. Usually, I mean, we'll work together and do different parts of this or that, but, and we coordinate and share intelligence. So, I mean, our, Central Command knows what the Israelis are doing. The Israelis know what CENTCOM is doing. And that way, we don't step on each other's toes kind of thing. But a coordinated campaign between the two countries where the Israeli Air Force is, it's like, hey, here's your job. You go hit these targets. And the American U.S. Air Force, we're going to go in, we're going to hit these targets over here and do this and do that, stay out of this area. And, oh, okay. And you guys stay out of here. That could be really interesting. That would be our first joint operation between the two countries. Real coordinated airstrikes. Could be fun. But the point is that threat is hanging out there. So if you're the mullahs, it's like, ideally what they'd like is to sit back, keep the violence at a low murmur, and then just slowly let this all kind of burn itself out and get back in control of the country. But that may not happen. People are, again, the government is impotent, the circumstances are ripe, everyone can continue protesting, continue, seeking this alternative. The government may just fall. if they really hit the protesters hard, this is the question of timing, because you have to be very careful. Persians are incredibly nationalist. And this is the hard part with Iran. Like, Iranian people are very smart and very cool as people, right? But they are patriotic. And so if we just go in and start bombing now, a lot of Iranians may say, well, okay, the government is impotent, but I don't like that these foreigners are getting involved, right? So the timing has to be right. So when this goes down, if in fact the U.S. and Israel choose to intervene, and how and when, and maybe Trump says he doesn't want Israel intervening at all, right? Maybe more politic if Israel just stays out of it. Let the U.S. do some bombing and just some warnings to the regime to behave themselves. You know, we'll see. But the timing is everything. So Trump is going to wait until the time is right. All right. So what's going to happen? We'll see. At this point, like the best I could do is take a position, calls and puts. I'll take my option position. And if it goes above here, I'll sell. If it goes below here, I'll sell. We will see. So, if the protests continue, the longer they go on, the more impotent the government looks, the weaker the regime becomes. If the regime tries to hit back hard, that may be a good time to intervene a little bit, do a little bit of bombing, a warning. We'll see how that goes. If the regime hits back really hard against the people and we really, bomb the snot out of them, who knows what could happen. That would be an escalation. That'll take things to a different notch. My hope, my supreme hope, my prayer, my lips to God's ears, if he's listening, is that this will lead to the downfall of the regime. That the mullahs will jump on a plane and fly to Moscow, and the IRGC will go running for the hills, and maybe the army will just kind of take over power temporarily, and then free elections can be held at some point in the not too distant future, and the Iranian people can be in charge of their own future. That's what I want. That's what I want to see. I do have to say real quick, and I'm kind of sad to have to say it because, I like the Iranian community, and a lot of them are very loyal to the son of the Shah. So the Shah died shortly after he departed Iran, but his son Reza Pahlavi is out there, and he's talked of maybe going back to Iran and leading some kind of interim government. You'll hear a lot of the people who are very zealous supporters of the Shah's son going out and they'll take videos where people are protesting and they'll edit over them with pro-Shah chants. The fact is, the Shah isn't any more popular than the current government. Iranians didn't like the Shah because he was oppressive. Yes, he was modernist, but he was oppressive. And you ask a Kurd, oh my God, the whole western part of Iran is Kurdish, predominantly Kurdish. The Kurds hate the Shah. I mean, he murdered a lot of Kurds and oppressed them because he wanted to keep the country together. So Kurds don't like the Shah or his legacy, his son, etc. And a lot of people in Iran don't want to go back that direction. I don't think that Pahlavi or the royal institutions will have anything to do with the rest, with the interim government or any change in government. I don't think there's a need for any of that. Like I said, get some kind of interim leader into office, but not a Pahlavi, and hold elections. And that's an easy thing to do. The Iranian people are perfectly well versed with democracy. They can have an election. They can make choices for themselves, elect a parliament, elect a president, and then that government will go forward from there. And whoever they elect will certainly, at this point, very certainly be not a cleric and someone far more moderate and pro-Western. And we can kind of, like we were just talking about with Venezuela, start slowly taking the steps, releasing political prisoners, ending the repression, getting rid of the religious police, and just slowly letting the people of Iran do their thing. And as they do that, and as sanctions are lifted and we start to work together and Iran is no longer financing terrorism and all that, things will, life will improve for ordinary Iranians, and they'll make their political choices and go from there. We'll see. So I appreciate the zeal of the pro-Shah faction, but let's not go too far here. The people of Iran are not chanting for the return of the Shah, wishful thinking there at its finest. So just be aware of that. Okay. Um, so I would like to note, I mean, Bibi has been itching. You know, talked to Trump in their recent meeting. Bibi's been itching for Israel to get in there and make another go at the Iranian regime. They're rebuilding their missile infrastructure. They're building more ballistic missiles. They've got a bunch more to fire now if they have to, if they want to, you know, retaliate against Israel or attack others, U.S. allies in the region. So they're trying to do all that. And the Israelis wanted to get on top of that. And of course, they're sending money to try to rebuild Hamas and Hezbollah and all this kind of thing too. So, you know, that's continuing. If we can nip this in the bud, if we can get the head of the snake, you know, that will help a lot. Then without financing, Hezbollah will become more impotent itself, and the Lebanese government will be able to assert greater sovereignty here and there. Hamas's financing will wither, and then other terror groups will try to vie for power, and they'll have problems internally. I mean, just because the money goes away from Hamas isn't going to change who the people of Gaza are. They're still going to be racist. They're still going to be terrorists. They still raise their sons to be capable of the kinds of horrors that were committed on October 7th. And, you know, what have you. Oh, anyway, the chaos in Iran in the meantime is a good sign. The people there are rising up. The government is embattled. You remember what I said after the 12-day war was it was up to Israel and the Saudis and others to get into Iraq and bring the war to Iran's front porch. Well, it seems we've got it into their bedroom at this point, so into the two-chambered heart of Iran. So bring the conflict to them. So, you know, on October 7th, Iran was pulling the strings from Tehran and doing things in Gaza and Lebanon and Yemen. Now the chaos is in their bedroom. Right now, it's their problem. So, you know, we'll go from there. Will this thing blow up and escalate very quickly? It could. It could be a slow burn. It's not entirely clear. What I do know is that Iran is rebuilding. Israeli sources are clear on that. I can't go into too much detail, but they are trying to build all their stuff back. And, you know, but we knew they were going to, I mean, that's not a surprise, right? We knew they were going to do that. And that's why the Israelis have been keen to get on this. Okay. That's you up to date, my friends. It's been a bad week for the Axis powers. Yeah, they've lost Venezuela. They basically lost their toehold in the New World. You know, there's still Cuba, and they've got a few other little holds here, but those are slowly drying up, slowly disappearing. Iran's embattled, so one of the four major Axis powers may be going down. Obviously, not one of the biggest ones. Russia is in deep, deep trouble. Right, the war in Ukraine has now gone on longer than the Second World War. Right, from June 23rd, 1941, when Hitler invaded the Soviet Union, it was 1,417 days before Germany surrendered on May 8th. Actually, it surrendered on May 8th to the Western Allies. The Russians made them repeat on May 9th because the Russians wanted to be part of the ceremony too. In any case, to May 9th, 1945, all right, 1,417 days. It's now been 1,418 days. And what's the result, right? Before this war began, Russia already controlled part of Donetsk. They've moved 30 to 40 miles, you know, maybe 50 kilometers, 60 kilometers from where they had controlled before. And that's where the front lines are now. So Russia's lost 1 million men. It's been 4 years. It's a grinding war. Russian mill bloggers are even having to admit that the Ukrainians have been very effective with their infantry tactics. Ukraine has been able to launch counteroffensives and push them out of certain areas. So that war isn't going especially well. China's trying to do its exercises, and they've got their fishing fleets out all there. I've been complaining about that. Trump hasn't been addressing that directly. Frustrates me, but that's okay. I'm allowed to be frustrated. I'm allowed to have disagreements here and there. But on the whole, China is getting awfully lonely. It's getting chilly and lonely over there. Some of their friends are disappearing and embattled and having problems. And, you know, pretty soon China might just stand alone. And if they do, can't invade Taiwan if the US can bring all of our forces to bear, right? That's not a good thing for them. So, all right, so there's that. I'll come back here after the break and talk about naval procurement, and then we'll call it a day. How about that, my friends? All right, we've got this battleship thing. I, uh, I've been asked to comment. Now, I have a lot of, funny things to say, I suppose. Naval procurement is a hobby of mine, so you're going to hear about that a little bit here in the show. Used to be a submariner myself, and I have a thing or two to say about naval procurement. And when you study naval history, you start to get an idea of these kinds of things. One of my favorite things, maybe it'd be worth writing a book about someday, was basically, you know, lessons of history. Like if you could go back to 1937 and tell the Navy, tell someone there, so let's just assume you had someone's ear. You could convince one person of some influence in the Navy, Congress, maybe, uh, you know, Congressman, Carl Vinson, so some, he's kind of the patron saint of the Navy at the time. Anyway, you could convince someone would listen to you. What would you tell them? Right? Knowing the history of the Second World War, what are some of the objective things you would tell them? Well, for one thing, destroyers, frigates, what we now call frigates, destroyers, destroyer escorts, small ships are a lot more valuable than people think. They took on battleships during the war, shots go right through them. They're cheap and like dollar for dollar, resource for effect, far more efficient in their use. Submarines obviously were huge, and aircraft carriers were huge, and battleships not as useful, but still useful. There were still some battleship engagements. Famously, Washington and Kirishima. Washington blasted a bunch of 16-inch naval rifles at Kirishima and poked a bunch of holes in her, sank her right there in Iron Bottom Sound in the middle of Guadalcanal. And that basically ended the Japanese efforts to bombard Henderson Field and drive the Marines off of Guadalcanal. Definitively gave us the W in the Guadalcanal campaign, which turned out to be the turning point of the war. So battleships do still have a role to play. Battles around the Philippines, battleships played a role at the Battle of the Philippine Sea. Before that, battleships went south ahead of the aircraft carriers and bore the brunt of the Japanese air attack. So all the fighters were doing the turkey shoot, shooting down a bunch of Japanese planes. When the Japanese planes reached the American ships that they reached were our battleships, some of which, including the Alabama, took a little damage. But the main thing is they have the massive anti-aircraft capability, and it was better for them to be out there, for the Japanese to attack, rather than the aircraft carriers, which are much more vulnerable, don't have armored flight decks and this kind of thing. Okay. So battleships had their uses. But for the cost, and given the technology and the power of aircraft and all of that, from the Second World War on, it just didn't make any sense to build anymore. The Iowa-class battleships were essentially the ultimate battleship for the United States, and we were kind of done with them. Pretty soon, by the end of the 50s, we decommissioned and scrapped all of our pre-war battleships, and slowly but surely, the North Carolina class, North Carolina and Washington, were taken out of commission, and so was the Sodak class, South Dakota and her sister ships. Today, the North Carolina is a museum, and the USS Alabama is in Mobile. That's another museum. Great museums to go visit. Haven't been to the North Carolina, but I have been to the Alabama with several of my sons, and that is just a blast. That's a great museum. I've also been to the Iowa with one of my boys, and that's also a great museum and a great time. So battleships are cool for kids. But, back to this point of people are, we're bringing back battleships. When the first battleships were built, my friends, they were, 3-deck ships of the line, wooden ships with sails. They were the term Drachen Eiffel is a great channel you can find on YouTube. I love Drac. He's Western Approaches guy. He's on there. He's done all this naval stuff. He's got awesome stuff. I check it out. If you're a naval geek like me, you'll love all of his content. You probably already know who he is, who I'm talking about. And he made the point that the term battleship comes from line of battle ship, or ship of the line. You know, if you take the line of battle out, it's battleship, right? Line of battleship, ship of the line. And these were ships with 32-pound cannon, 24-pound cannon, carronades. Like these were the classic era of naval combat, Trafalgar and what. Put a broadside into her if you would. This kind of thing. Great stuff. As a kid, some of my favorite times were me imagining, fighting at Trafalgar beside Lord Nelson and at the Battle of the Nile or in Copenhagen. These are just the classic naval battles, and some pretty desperately fought engagements actually, for the one-sided nature of the victories that Nelson achieved. They were touch and go, and there were times when they almost ended in disaster. They came close to that, especially at Copenhagen. Okay, so that's what a battleship is. One of the problems the United States had in the War of 1812 is that we didn't have any battleships. We didn't have any ships of the line. We had a bunch of really awesome super frigates, but even super frigates like the Constitution can't go up against a line of battleship. It's too big. Okay, so in the American Civil War, we started slapping iron onto wooden ships we called ironclads. And pretty soon after the Civil War, started making ships out of steel. And now a new kind of battleship was developed, a lightly armored ship with many different types of guns, 8-inch guns, 6-inch guns, 5-inch guns. Funny looking things, these pre-dreadnought battleships. If you want to see something like that, USS Olympia, which is a battle cruiser, Commodore Dewey sailed into Manila Harbor and captured the whole Philippines, leading the fleet with this ship. That's in Philadelphia. It's a great place to go. Beautiful ship. And I should mention the Texas. The USS Texas is out of dry dock now. It's been cleaned up. That's the only super dreadnought left. In the years just after the dreadnoughts, the U.S. started building super dreadnoughts, where it's like, this ship has 10, 14-inch guns. The Texas and its sister ship, the New York, were the first two battleships in the U.S. Navy to have 14 instead of 12-inch guns. Big guns. We're getting bigger guns. They shoot farther. They're more deadly when they hit. Good stuff. Eventually, we got up to 16-inch guns. So there you go. Okay. So these ships get bigger and what have you. With the Dreadnought and later the South Carolina class, actually, this is one of those funny stories. The United States actually had a design like the Dreadnought before the Dreadnought, but Congress wouldn't pay to buy it, and they built more pre-Dreadnought battleships instead, the George Washington class, which proved to be pretty ineffective, and we ultimately sold them to Greece. But, the idea of the Dreadnought battleship is we have this armored ship. It's all big gun, so you're going to have in the case of the Dreadnought, 10, 13-inch guns, or in the case of our first Dreadnought battleships, the South Carolina class, we're going to have 8, 12-inch guns, but big guns, right? And you have an armored citadel in the ship. The ship is armored, the main core of the ship, the turrets, the deck, the sides of the ship around the center of the ship where all the things are contained, is armored against shot from the same size cannon. So if you have 12-inch guns, you're armored for 12-inch shells, and so on and so forth. And so we had this idea, we were going to have these big battleships, and then we're going to go slug it out and fight, and that was how wars were going to be won. And then there was the Battle of Jutland, or as I like to call it, Jutland. Jutland is it's not so much fun to say. Anyway, the Battle of Jutland, British battle cruisers exploded. So lacking the armor turned out to be a bad thing. German cruisers, on the other hand, took a pounding and kept sailing. If you look at go look at some of the battle damage done to the German cruisers and battleships in the Battle of Jutland. I mean, like they took a pounding, and there were ships that were sunk, but of course they took a pounding and kept coming. So they didn't prove especially effective there. And by the Second World War, of course, we had aircraft. And so slow-moving, heavy warships weren't as valuable. But the battleship had evolved. So, you know, here we have, our first battleship. The line of battleship is a wooden ship with cannons and carronades and sails and, broadside into, if you please. And then we get to the iron pre-dreadnought battleship. It's a steel ship, lots bristling with guns of various sizes and, a little bit of armor, but, just goes out there like a turtle into battle and boom, 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 boom to fight it out. And then we get to the dreadnought battleship, all big gun, armored citadel to repel approximately equal fire that it can dish out. Sit there in a battle and boom, back and forth, slug it out like Jutland. Super dreadnought, which is just a bigger version of that, more guns. Basically, we're going to have 10 or 12 guns instead of the 8, and all of that. And then we get to the fast battleships, fast dreadnought battleships. That's with like North Carolina on ships that can travel at about 30 knots or faster. They're heavily armored and they've got big 16-inch guns that can make a big bang. Okay. So by 1943, we built our last. There were originally going to be 6 Iowa-class ships, but 2 were canceled, and the Montana-class that followed. So we have 4 Iowas. Iowa, New Jersey, Missouri, and Wisconsin. They're all museums now. And there's a funny story about that. So, and all this stuff. The battleship is obsolete. But then there was the Korean War. And in the Korean War, we had our aircraft carriers and whatever, but it turns out you still need naval artillery to bombard shore positions in support of amphibious landings. And it's still convenient, especially in a country that is a peninsula where there's water on this side and that you could have ships sailing along the coast that could handle all of the stuff going on the coast, including that famous exchange of the battleship Wisconsin, where they were hit by North Korean artillery, North Korean NORC artillery from a mountain. And so, the captain's like, remove that mountain. Boom. No more mountain. It's a great story. So the battleships were back. We'd written them off. They were obsolete, gone, mothballed, never going to see them again, and they're back. And they just kept coming back. By the 1980s, the Russians had built 4 of these big Kirov-class cruisers that were just bristling with cruise missiles and what have you. And America was like, okay, so the Russians have big ships now. Well, guess what? We had big ships too. And so out of mothballs came the Iowa class. And so it's like they just keep coming back. Because you have a big ship with a big deck, so you can put a bunch of Tomahawk cruise missiles on it. And it's like, we can play this game too. Okay. And of course, that led famously to their last action in warfare in 1991, where Missouri and Wisconsin fired in support of Marines who were landing in Kuwait City. So they destroyed Iraqi positions. Okay. So the battleship as an escort of aircraft carriers, as a big ship, as a weapons platform, and as a shore bombardment, as naval artillery, never really became obsolete. They still had use, even into the 1990s, right? And the Navy kept them around, ready for action for many years thereafter. But at a certain point, they really are ancient, and so now they are museums. Now, they're being maintained. If you want to follow the channel at the Battleship New Jersey, they spend a lot of time talking about all the things it takes to maintain the battleship, but they're not really serviceable for action. Okay, so that's the history. We've got all that stuff. Let's talk about now. The United States faces a number of challenges in the naval realm now. 1, we do not have the shipbuilding capacity to keep up with the Chinese. Now, granted, most of China's ships are small, short-range craft, okay, but still, even that, we tried the littoral combat ship, which was supposed to be a small, short-range craft that we could use to, do this fight. That didn't work. I proposed, building a corvette, basically, a small frigate that would be seaworthy, but, just get the minimum out there. Just, a few missiles, 76 millimeter gun, just get it out there so that you'd have a ship that you could use to cover the sea. Build a lot of them. That was my idea. And it looks like we're going to do that. The Constellation class frigate got out of hand. We were going to do this, copy the Frem frigate. And I was like, 80% of it got changed and put all these missiles on it. It's not cheap and easy anymore, and we're not going to get them on time. So 2 of those will be built. but they're way behind schedule. So now we're going with the Legend class National Security Cutter as our frigate. We just need to be able to build a lot of ships, and we can't. We just don't have the capacity to do that. Okay, so that's problem number one. That means that the ships that we build are going to have to be capable of engaging multiple targets. So each of our ships and submarines is going to have to be worth a lot more of theirs. Now, one thing we know from the war games that I talked about years ago is that submarines will have a field day. So we know that our subs are going to, be worth, you know, maybe 25 Chinese ships each, let's just say. And if we had 2 on station around Taiwan at the time, they're going to have a great time. They're going to go out and they're going to destroy a lot of targets. But ultimately, they're going to run out of torpedoes. They're going to run out of missiles. They're going to be empty Winchesters, they say in the Air Force. In air warfare, right? So they're Winchester. They've got to go back, empty. We'll tape a broom to the periscope and for a clean sweep and sail back into the harbor in Guam or Pearl Harbor, something like that, and be reloaded. But that takes time. And all that time away from the battle zone, combat zone, means that action's happening and they're not participating. So, when the war starts, hopefully we could get more boats out there quickly, but we're going to need more ships in the area. And those ships are going to have staying power. They're going to have to be able to get into the fight. They're going to have to be able to take out multiple enemy targets, and they're going to have to be able to engage in combat. So that's problem number 2, is that our ships are just going to have to be capable of taking those on. So 1, we can't build as many ships. 2, our ships are going to have to be better and have some staying power. 3, we're in a curious place technology-wise. There's this sword and shield thing that always happens, right? So you build a better shield, so you build a better sword. So you build a better shield, so you build a better sword, right? So we've got... we had really good air defense. We had the Sea-Whiz cannons, point defense of various kinds. Our ships are really well protected. So the Chinese are like, okay, we're just going to build a whole bunch of cheap missiles and we can just fling hundreds of them at you. Good luck, right? And the fact is, an unarmored ship like an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, if they take one hit by a Silkworm missile or even a drone, any kind of explosion will penetrate the hull, could cause a lot of damage, could disable the whole ship. Okay, any major munition, torpedo, missile, whatever, it's finished. Okay, so we've got this point now where the sword is able to penetrate our defenses. Like, it's not a matter of how good your shield is, it's just they're going to throw a whole bunch of stuff at you. Like one of those animes where somebody throws 100 darts at you at once. Unless you have magic powers, you're going to get hit somewhere, right? Okay. So that's a problem. How do you repel that? Well, if you've got point defenses, that does some of it. But what if the ship was armored? This is a question that's been kicking around for about 20 years now. People have been talking about, as the technology has changed, yeah, you get all these cheap drones, you've got all these cruise missiles and such. But what if a ship were armored so that if it took a hit, it could keep on fighting? Remember what I just said about Jutland and the German cruisers there? Took a pounding. All right. A lot of ships took a pounding during the battleships during the First and Second World War and kept coming. Right. So a ship that could stay in the fight. Okay. So you get a drone in and you hit the Defiant. As a Star Trek fan, I'm sorry, I just can't. My sons and I love Deep Space Nine, and we just can't say that with a straight face. We're so excited. This is a great name. Trump-class battleship, USS Defiant, BBG-1. It's just awesome. You can't get over the coolness factor with this. All right. But coolness isn't a reason to make procurement decisions. Here's some realities. The sword is just too powerful. It's going to penetrate whatever shield we put up in terms of point defenses and whatever. So that shield is going to have to be in the ship. We need the armored citadel now. Okay, light drones, they can damage, radar and electronic equipment and stuff up on top, perhaps. But in terms of really harming the ship, getting at the ship's engines, at the crew, damaging command and control compartments, that's all going to be in an armored citadel. That'll be very difficult to hit. If it can take a cruise missile, if it can take a few drones and still fight, that's a very different situation from our lighter ships. So that's important. And of course, having big guns. Well, we're talking about this railgun. The Navy abandoned the railgun. It's a missile Navy, and that's really unfortunate. I remember being really disappointed when that decision was made back in 2012. It was over all kinds of issues that they claimed, well, barrel usage. I mean, you know, at a certain point, these projectiles are so hot that you'll go through barrels very quickly. Means that it can't fire many shots in the field before you have to bring it back to base and replace the barrel, which is an arduous thing to do. Um, but that's one of those things. Okay, so let's look at materials. Let's look at how do we make a better barrel and whatever it costs, and but they didn't want to do it. That's a simple fact. The Navy just didn't want to do it. So we gave up on it, which was a really stupid idea because the railgun is a really incredible technology. The 32 megajoule railgun that Trump was talking about at the press conference when he announced these battleships, and the one that the Japanese are testing, have actually tested at sea. It's beautiful. The Japanese tested one of these at sea, and you can see the impact made by the shell. It's like an X shape because it's got X-shaped fins and a hole in the center where the main projectile went through. Would have caused an incredible amount of damage to the ship. But this thing travels at 6.5, 7 times the speed of sound. Mach 7, this projectile is traveling at, and it's just a kinetic warhead. And you can also get a guided warhead as well, where it can actually fly itself to target. Railguns can intercept hypersonic missiles. If you have the computer aim it, fire the projectile, it can go out there. It's a hypersonic projectile. It can intercept a hypersonic weapon far enough away from the ship to keep it from damaging the ship. Railguns can fire at great range at ground targets. They can fire at other ships, and they can fire repeatedly. How many times is now a question of barrel life? How many shots per barrel? Now, the Japanese, when they designed theirs, were aiming for about 120 shots per barrel. Which, I mean, just take that for a second. 120 shots, right? How many missiles are going to be on this bat? 148, right? Those are one use, right? You get an SM-6 missile that's sitting in there. It can intercept all kinds of things, ballistic missiles or whatever. It's a really great weapon system. But as soon as you launch it up out of that tube, it's gone. You have to go back to base to refill the tubes, right? That missile cell is empty. So a gun, on the other hand, like the 5-inch guns that we use, boom, 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 it fires, it reloads, okay? Barrel gets hot, you let it cool, and then boom, 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 again, right? Same thing with this railgun. So the Japanese were aiming for 120 shots. That's a lot of shots right there, okay? That's almost the 148. So that's almost a 1-for-1 for all the missiles that we're going to have on the ship. Turns out the Japanese now are looking at about 200 shots per barrel. And that's with present technology. Now, if the US and Japan would sit down, some money were exchanged, we help them develop their weapon system, and then maybe we'll buy some for our ships down the road here. We could probably get that higher. If you could get that to 300 shots, I mean, God, can you imagine what you could do with 300 railgun shots? Even 200 is just mind-boggling as you start thinking about what you can do when you can fire projectiles. It's Mach 7, for God's sake. And over the kinds of ranges and distances, the Japanese haven't said how far theirs can fire, but let's just say it's a long way. Okay, so you can fire over the horizon with this. So, you can attack Japanese ships from afar. Obviously, this battleship is going to operate in a task force. It'll have a frigate, a destroyer, maybe a submarine with it. So it'll have other ships with it. But, and it can get in there with that railgun, and it can intercept stuff coming at the fleet. It can fire at enemy ships. It can, fire at ground targets. It can hang in the battle. It can take a few hits if it needs to and still keep fighting. It's a beautiful idea. You might almost call it a battleship. It's a large ship that's armored with a big gun, not all that different from the line of battleships that Nelson sailed at Trafalgar, or the pre-dreadnought turtle-looking ships of the late 19th century and early 20th, or the dreadnoughts, super dreadnoughts, and fast battleships of the Second World War. Okay, so there's that. But we have to do something. All right, we have to change our ways of thinking. But a ship that can hang in battle and fight like that one ship and its task force could be worth a sixth, maybe more of the Chinese Navy right there, plus our submarines and the field day that they're going to have. That's a really big deterrent. And we're planning to build 2 of these bad boys, right? Which means it'd be easier to keep 1 at sea. Ultimately, there's talk of building 10, maybe 24, 25. Awesome, good. The more the merrier, because that's a ship that can hang in battle and do a lot of things. And, with point defenses, again, lasers, they're going to start using lasers on these. Israel's already developed lasers. The Navy's got a laser system it's working on right now. You can put these things in effect. Takes up a lot of power, but there's no projectile, right? So as a point defense goes, like you heat up an enemy projectile until it explodes and then it's gone. And of course, the left is losing their mind. Trump's going at battleships. Battleships are obsolete. If you don't know what a battleship is, 1, and 2, don't understand the naval predicament that we're in, then I can see that. Once again, my friends, Orange Man bad is not a basis for making naval procurement decisions. Neither is it's just so cool. Okay, so taking the cool factor out, logically and rationally, I would probably have thought more of building a lot more destroyers and frigates if someone had asked me. What I think we need to move, and I've told you several times, we need to move away from the supercarrier. The supercarrier just puts too many resources in one place, and it's a target, right? And again, with the sword, like they can just fling missile after missile after missile at it. In the war games, the Chinese consistently sunk 1 or 2 carriers. There are 5,000 men aboard those carriers, a lot of planes, a lot of resources. That's putting a lot of our guys at risk, right? And if they have to stand off from Taiwan and send fueling aircraft ahead so that our planes have to take off, fly, refuel, fight, and come back, that's like, it's a waste. Like we could just use the Philippines for that instead of having to have a super carrier out there sailing near the Philippines to fight China. Right, the Philippines will give us an airbase. We have an airbase in Guam. Right, you can take off from Guam, refuel on your way into combat, go loiter and fight your battle, and then fly back to Guam. Okay, there's no need for a super carrier to be out there for that. So that's my big thing. This type of ship is, I think, headed in the right direction. It tries to address the sword and shield issue, and it gives us the firepower and the staying power to make this a real fight. The important thing here isn't as much how effective will these things be. It's the fact that the Chinese could never build anything like this. And even if they could, it'd be ticky-tacky. I mean, you've seen these videos of Chinese buildings, like you go to the patio area, and you can the railings, the guardrails, like you can just pull these things out, and the concrete, like you can just with your hand, like just pull it all apart. It's all really weak and fragile. I mean, that's kind of how they build things. But it'll have deterrent power, because when they think about the idea of going into battle with us, going up against ships like the Defiant, not going to be a lot of fun. And that's the key. Like I said, every day Xi Jinping gets up and does the math in his head, the calculations. Is this a good day to attack? And every day we want him to decide that it's not. And this is how we unbalance the equation for him. All right, with that, I'm going to close this episode. It's been a great time. I'm glad to be back. I'm going to keep making these things and try to feel better and, keep shooting these your way. Probably Trump's going to do something in the next day or two, and this episode will be behind the news cycle, but I appreciate you guys listening anyway. Please rate, like, subscribe, all that stuff. I never say that, and I'm told I'm supposed to. I appreciate you guys very much for listening, as always, and I look forward to making more content. So with that, I will say, as always, goodbye, lehitrot.
Of the history, stand with me, look into my eyes and see. People go away but never say goodbye. Someone stole the moon tonight, took my light. Everything is black and white. Who's the fool who told you boys don't cry? Hours and hours and flowers. Life is no game for the cowards. Why? mysterious ride, dancing in the storm. We got nothing to hide. Take me home and leave the world behind. Baby, promise me that never again. I'm still wet from this October rain. October rain. Living in a fantasy, ecstasy, everything is meant to be. We shall pass, but love will never die. Hours and flowers, life is no game for the cowards. Why the time goes wild. Every day I'm losing my mind, holding on in this mysterious ride, dancing in the storm. We got nothing to hide. Take me home and leave the world behind. Baby, promise me that never again. I'm still wet from this October rain. October rain. October rain. Baby, promise me that never again. I'm still wet from this October rain. October rain. Nation אין מקום, אין אותי מיום ליום, כולם ילדים טובים אחד אחד. Bring them back home now.